Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's live panel discussion, Zero Trust, Extending Policy and Practice to Physical Security. For years, Zero Trust has been a mainstay of cybersecurity, built on the premise of never trust, always verify. But as the lines between physical and digital environments blur, this philosophy has moved beyond the server room into the control room. Today's organizations face threats across both domains where access credentials, IoT devices, video systems, and facility networks are potential gateways for intrusion. Our discussion today is going to focus on how to bring zero trust principles, which include continuous verification, least privilege access, and segmentation into physical security operations. We'll explore how policies once used to secure data and identity can now govern physical access, surveillance, and even building automation systems. Our panel of experts will reveal adopting Zero Trust for physical security isn't just about technology. It's about transforming trust models, breaking down those silos that we're all familiar with, and redefining what secure access truly means in a converged enterprise. We want to thank Prometheus for being our sponsor and our host today for this. And I'm Steve Lasky. I'm the editorial director for Endeavor Business Media Security Group, which includes securityinfowatch.com, our publications Security Executive, Security Business, and Locksmith Ledger, and I will be your moderator today. But before we begin, let me run through some basics for viewing this event on our platform. This presentation is live and interactive, allowing you to ask questions at any time via the Ask a Question box in the presentation window. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the event using the Q&A tool on the left side of your screen. We really do want this to be interactive, so we anytime during this webinar, please go ahead and slot your questions in there, and we'll get to them at the end of the hour. And ones that we don't have time to talk about, we will have our panel try to get back with you via email. If you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please type your issue into the Ask a Question box, and a member of our production and technical team will assist you. If you are running pop-up blocking software, we advise you to disable it to better view the webinar today. Additionally, it is recommended that you close all other applications for optimal performance. For your convenience, this presentation will be available on demand 24 hours after this live event. All registrants will receive a reminder email with a link to the presentation, which will also be available on the SIW homepage. And as a reminder, you may qualify for SEU credits following this event today. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's event, please remain logged on for the duration of the webinar. You will automatically receive your certificate via email within 24 hours. Following the webinar, it's going to be your responsibility, though, for checking with your association and your respective organizations to verify that this event met its criteria. Finally, this month's webinar will be archived on our site for 6 months. So, with our housekeeping out of the way, I am going to introduce our panel here. Above me, as it should be, is Maria Sumnicht. She is the National Cybersecurity Director for Critical Infrastructure with the Task Force on Homeland Security, which advises Congress and government leaders on policies to protect the nation's critical infrastructure. She previously led New York City's first IoT and ICS cybersecurity program, and earlier served with NASA Ames Research Center, where she was part of the first ever cybersecurity incident response team. We are thrilled to have Maria with us today. We also have to my caddy corner, upper right, is Pierre Bourgeix. Pierre is the CEO and founder of ESS Convergent. He has spent 30 years as a global security consultant and innovator, drawing experience with the RAND Corporation, the U.S. State Department, ADT, Tyco Security, High Security, and a bevy of others. Currently, Pierre is the CTO and founder of ESI Convergent, as I just mentioned. His primary expertise is in physical and cybersecurity governance, and he has years of experience with the physical security arena, including that with the U.S. Secret Service, NASA, and the CIA. And finally, our host and our sponsor today, beside me on the lower half of the panel, is Stephen Brown. And Stephen is the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for Prometheus Security Group Global. He is a critical infrastructure security expert and a U.S. Air Force veteran with more than 23 years of operations, strategy, policy design, and implementations experience securing critical infrastructure and strategic assets worldwide. PSG provides unified security solutions specializing in software and hardware for video surveillance, access control, intrusion detections, and cybersecurity. Its open architecture, zero trust, scalable, reliable security solutions are entrusted to protect the United States' most sensitive strategic assets along with critical missions, facilities, and people around the world. So, very impressive group of people. And we are going to kick it off right now. And we're going to kind of open this up to everybody. So zero trust has become one of the most talked about frameworks in cybersecurity. And anybody involved in that environment is very familiar with it. So how would each of you define zero trust in the context of physical security? And what does it really mean at the edge? Maria, I'm going to let you kick it off for us.
So I went a step further. I actually coined the term no trust. And I did that a while back. And I took that same concept, which is now known as zero trust. And that's how I implemented the securing of IoT across New York City. Basically, the vendor was not trusted until they went through a rigorous assessment program. And after that, after they remediated what the vulnerabilities that were discovered, then there was a snapshot in time. In other words, with that firmware, with that hardware device, with that application version of the cloud program, everything at snapshot in time, that we considered, okay, now instead of zero trust, we trust it here. And so it's very important that zero trust is not just the job of the CISO. Zero trust has to come as a thought leadership concept from the top down, from the CFO to the CEO. It has to be something that is part of the culture. If it doesn't become part of the culture, then the CISO and those implementing zero trust will not be successful.
Pierre, take it a little further in your experience, because you're involved on both sides of the fence here.
Yeah. So speaking from two sides, from the manufacturer and the practitioner side, one of the challenges that I think everyone has to just come to a position on is that all IoT infrastructure is vulnerable. Now, what does that mean, right? You start with the fact that everything is vulnerable. And how you protect infrastructure and support infrastructure and define that architecture that supports every system, you have to inevitably determine what the acceptable level of risk you have as an organization within that, say, environment. So we'll take it between a utility all the way to a manufacturer who produces systems. The reality is each one is vulnerable based upon the systems they use, the architecture and infrastructure they support, and how they protect that infrastructure. You know, the reality is that that's where we are with when zero trust became, prevalent. It was really determining how do we, in our position as a vulnerable infrastructure, ensure security. And the only way to do it is to create no trust, as Maria defined. The thing is that for a manufacturer, it's different than, and I'll say the product manufacturer is different than a practitioner's perspective. Practitioner has to determine whatever enters my environment is vulnerable. I have to figure out how to protect myself. And the reality is that within the stakeholders of that practitioners group, there's a great deal of separation and frankly, siloed behavior. IT, physical security, OT, IoT all live in different worlds. There's very little structure behind that which prevents vulnerabilities and we'll just say redundancies. Structure is not set perfectly so that we are in effect creating unification so that we can validate that this is the way to go. This is why zero trust is very hard, because everyone has their own domain. Everybody has their own rules. They don't collaborate. They don't effectively manage, and therefore they allow vulnerabilities. Why? Because they all want to do the way they want to do it. This is the biggest challenge facing our world. It happens in the utility sector. It happens in energy, water. I can go on and on and on, which we deal with daily. We know we're dealing with it today. So zero trust, from the standpoint of what we decide, is determined based upon the acceptance of risk and the non-acceptance of risk. How you define that in your organization and how we relate that to, say, the physical security world and also the manufacturers who produce technology is to align much more closely and define what is going to really become the gold standard. There is no standard.
Right.
This is the challenge.
Stephen, on your end, when we're talking about zero trust, when we're talking about security, the bottom line from your perspective is accurate data means accurate responses. And, how do you interpret that, having been, again, now as a solutions provider, but also, someone that was charged with this as an end user for years?
Yeah, great question. Let's step back first quickly, though. Your first question, I think, was a lot around the realm of sort of thought of defining what zero trust
Correct.
really is, right? So, and whether we're talking about the realm of physical security, where you get down into some sort of focused in on the physical security equipment and the cyber physical systems that interact with our physical security equipment. More broadly, what is zero trust, right? So it's a fundamental reimagining of cybersecurity, right? So instead of assuming we can build the walls high enough and thick enough to keep the bad guy out, right, which has been sort of the premise, philosophical basis for cybersecurity for decades, the zero trust model flips that on its head and assumes penetration, assumes somehow, some way, an actor has penetrated your defenses and they're in your system, and now what, right? And so when you take that approach, you then focus on how to mitigate lateral movement within your system, how to mitigate the ability to understand the system, right? So fundamental to being able to do anything to a system is to first understand it and map it. And classic cybersecurity attacks, they'll come in and sit on a network and just sort of map it out and see where everything is, find where the good stuff is, and then figure out a way to take that out. In the zero trust model, then the idea is mitigate that. Certainly the walls are high, certainly the walls are thick, but we mitigate the ability to understand the environment once they're past that, once they're in the system. And then we mitigate their ability to maneuver, right? So least privilege access, microsegmentation, all the things that we've already sort of heard some hints at. And there's 7 pillars. DoD has 7 pillars of what zero trust looks like. CISA has 5. There's a couple of different models, but they all come down to understanding who's on the network, what's on the network, what is it doing continuously at all times. So the ability to authenticate that. So, and then Pierre, perhaps the comment you made, I think maybe Pierre and I have had lively conversations over a long period of time on lots of topics in this realm. But the idea that IT, OT, IoT, all these things are separate, I think I agree in that they often are thought of that way. But I think we've long since realized, those of us who spend every day with this, the convergence that's happened over the decades, it's no longer a Venn diagram, right, where there's just a little bit of overlap between the two. It's basically, if you take those three systems, it's sort of three overlapping circles, right? So the vulnerabilities accepted by one impact the rest of the system. And that, I think, is key to the other points that you were making there, Pierre. And then for the audience, we are completely, it's converged systems is what we're dealing with here. And so how do we mitigate that in physical security systems where I penetrate through some innocuous sensor or actuator, and now I can turn on or off your lighting system, on or off that lighting system, open a turnstile, allow somebody access, cyber turns kinetic real quick.
And it's a great lead in. Maria, when we're talking about zero trust architecture, many people think that physical security is still separate from IT. I mean, we've been having this discussion before we got on air. In your opinion, what are the biggest misconceptions preventing this convergence that Stephen's talking about? And how can security leaders bridge that divide and really understand, zero trust architecture and the Purdue model, DMZ issues, and that bridge between IT and physical security edge devices and OT devices?
So I want to go back to what Pierre said, because
go ahead.
because a lot of this really, again, I said thought leadership, right? It's got to come from the top down to bring all the parties to the table, right? Engineering, OT, IT, and get them all on the same page that they have to work together. If you don't do that, you're never going to converge, period, because they live in their own world. They do. You can go over to the engineering side, and I call it engineering, but it's the control systems side, right? The engineers who control the program logic controllers, the human machine interface, HMIs, the guys who are responsible for, the hardware, not hardware like in servers and things like that we would know as typical IT data center hardware, but you're talking about the big valves, pumps, sensors. It's a whole different way of thinking, and they rarely get into the same room. They and in a lot of cases, OT, IT makes decisions without even considering them. They're not on the same page, and so this is incredibly important. Convergence will not happen until that is addressed, period. As far as I personally, and I have this on my LinkedIn profile, I test everything before you connect it to your network. That is zero trust. Don't just assume that a manufacturer has done their due diligence. They have not. In the time I spent in New York City, there wasn't a single manufacturer that actually had vulnerabilities that were not in the critical and high range. Every single one of them had that. So if you're connecting your network, if you're connecting these IoT devices, including cameras, right? I won't mention any manufacturers, but about 7 years ago, there was a manufacturer who was sending video to a country across the Pacific. I know Pierre knows about that. All right. You have to look at all these things. You have to look at the communication protocols. You have to do a thorough network assessment. And I'm just going to kick it over to Pierre, because I know he's not going to say something about all this.
He's squirming in his chair. We can see it right now.
It's toxic at this point.
It is.
The challenge that we're facing right now, fundamentally, and I'm going to just talk about the practitioner, and then I'm going to talk about the other two, which is the integrator, the other three, the integrator, the manufacturer, and the consultant. Let's just say right now that organizations, no matter what they are, who they are, like, since we do a lot of work with a lot of utilities, I'm going to tell you that we are still fundamentally behind in so many ways, because we are following governance and programs and policies from a let's say organizational standpoint that were defined 20, 30 years ago. Our organizations themselves have not evolved. And I mean, fundamentally, business processes haven't evolved. And because of that, we have leadership, we have program managers who are not defining technology stack managers, creating technology stack managers properly, collaborating across organizations to ensure redundancy doesn't exist, that systems are unified from a standpoint of, as basically Steve said, convergence is almost indefinitely a reality. We know that. The problem is the fundamental structure behind the businesses are not done correctly. They're not structured correctly. The hierarchy doesn't commit to this operational environment that's necessary to collaborate correctly. Building standards within organizations. Look, when I say sequence of operation, sequence of design, right? You know, if I don't have that process built into this, then there's no way I can fundamentally create a unified approach to business process and security. It's always going to be fractured because there's no governance, there's no communication, there's no structure. And with that, we have gaps. Gaps are so fundamental that when they don't even acknowledge having a conversation with IT before they determine the sequence of operation of a system, that's fundamentally flawed. And then there's the integrator who prefers to put their head in the sand and not really ask the hard questions to ensure that they can get to a sequence of operation that's fundamentally correct because they don't have the resources or the people that are educated enough to understand this. Then there's the consultants who say, it's not my problem, I'm not paid for it, and they put their head in the sand. So there's no guidance because they're not educated enough to answer the question. And then fundamentally, the manufacturers are simply producing technology based upon this cyber fantasy that just because you produce a product that's cyber secure doesn't mean it can be connected to a cyber environment. There's no understanding of data in transit, data at rest in terms of a cloud architecture environment. So these are all pieces fundamentally of a broken system that is continuing to exist because no one wants to speak and learn the language required to do the right thing so zero trust can fundamentally work. What I believe is you have to create I would say brute force this system into an architecture that there is no choice. And we just simply say, you no longer have a seat at the table, all of you. You're just simply going to be told what to do and behave. And if you don't do this, you will fundamentally be either fined or inevitably go to jail. That actually was stated directly by Pierre at Secure New Ground.
Yep. You know, I mean, so basically, you know, if we're looking at applying zero trust principles across both IT and physical security, you know, we got to extend that continuous verification, identity management, and secure access to all connected edge devices in the OT realm. And until we start doing that, you know, we're spinning our wheels. You know, Stephen, the Executive Order 14028 requires federal agencies to adopt zero trust by 2027. Number one, how do you see this mandate influencing private sector and critical infrastructure organizations? And number two, do you think this is going to, you know, make a dent in the problem?
I think there's a couple of ways to think about that. One, I think Pierre just talked about it a little bit, and Maria hinted at it earlier. A compliance mentality is the surest way to screw up the implementation. And so for those who are clutching their pearls or their chest in that first part of my answer, hang in there, there's more. Paul Harvey, right? Here's the rest of the story. The the compliance, the mandates that have come out, Executive Order 14028, for example, is meant to signal a seed change across federal government that says we've got to change the way that we do it. If you read the executive order and you read the OMB guidance, Office of Management and Budget guidance that followed that order, it lays out the case that we have to fundamentally shift the way that we're thinking about protecting our critical infrastructure in the cybersecurity around critical infrastructure. So credit to the Biden administration for having put that out and signaled to the rest of federal government, hey, get behind this and make it happen. And actually, the federal government writ large had a mandate to start moving this direction by the end of fiscal year 24, right? So by 30 September of 24. You've got the DOD was given special dispensation to go into 2027 to make that happen. And there's been significant transition and over the course of really the last 12 to 15 months in particular, the transition and focus on operational technology has for me been good to see. There was a lot of conversation about IT, the zero trust focus on IT, and as there should have been, email, SharePoint, classified systems, unclassified systems that are part of the business day-to-day work of the Department of Defense and the federal government writ large. And very important to get after that IT piece. But similar to zero trust, there's not, if you don't fix the rest of the chain, you've only addressed one part of it and you've left yourself incredibly vulnerable. So the OT transition that's happened out of DOD's zero trust portfolio management offices and all of the services under the Department of Defense that have moved out and taken some serious steps in adoption. But then across federal government, I've seen a lot of, without any disservice to the other federal agencies, a lot of copying DOD's homework, for lack of a better term. They've done a great job in terms of laying out the path, laying out specific measurable KPIs for how they're demonstrating the ability to get after it. But again, the key here is if it's simply a box checking exercise, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. You're missing the overarching direction and guidance to fundamentally shift. This is the answer here. And look, I'm with Prometheus Security Group, right? We develop hardware and software solutions that are intended, that are designed from inception to address this very problem. But zero trust is not a product. Zero trust is a mindset that without the product, it's incomplete. But you've got to adapt tactics, techniques, procedures, governance across the board in order to have a holistic approach. And in the physical security realm, the stakes could not be higher. Industrial control systems writ large across critical infrastructure, the ability to actuate, to use sensors and actuators and influence what a person sitting at a control panel is understanding about what's happening is a pretty dire situation to think about, right? Either something is manipulated so that it did or didn't happen, or an actuator is flipped and something is allowed to happen that is not intended. That's dire. If you take it into the realm of critical infrastructure security, I think in our pre-conversation here, Maria mentioned, think about it in the realm of a nuclear reactor and the ability to go in and influence shutting down the core, shutting down. It's downright scary. It's the stuff of horror movies. But the good news is there are solutions out there. We're working hard at that and mitigating that. We consider ourselves the first and only in the physical security industry to have gotten after that with a unified suite, a unified platform that's tried to get after this exact set of problems. And I'll certainly have more to say on that, but let me pause for a moment.
No, that's, and with that being said, Maria, you've often said that data is the new oil. And so from your perspective, how are end users beginning to realize the value of authenticated physical security data as a business asset rather than a sunk cost?
Well, data is not only the new oil, I call it the new platinum. It's more than oil. Oil is subject to OPEC, but sure. But end users are, increasingly realizing the value of authenticated physical security data, right? By recognizing its potential for business intelligence that goes beyond, simple risk mitigation. So modern unified systems help translate security information, such as video surveillance, access control logs, into a strategic asset that can drive operational efficiency, right? Enhance compliance and even increase revenue. Yeah, I'll use some examples. For example, an airport, right, has access control into different areas, right? There's the SIDA areas that you have to be badged to go into. Then there's the general public, and then there's the airport. Knowing exactly how these areas are being accessed and having that data, and I'm going to bring AI. I know we're going to touch on it later, but bringing it into a environment where it can be analyzed can help, for example, airports manage access into certain areas, be able to identify trends. And so it's really, data integration and convergence, operational efficiency, and optimization. I mean, I can go into these areas. I know we only have a little bit of time. Business intelligence and strategy, and of course, risk management, right? Risk mitigation, and so these are all the areas that can be helped using this data intelligently, right? And having the right kind of analysis, and I'm going to throw this over to everyone else to build on that.
Pierre will jump in here any second, I know it. And I'll just say, only if you can trust the data, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So garbage in, garbage out, bad data in, bad data out.
So 20 years ago, or maybe, but 15 years ago, the concept of data discovery was brought to us by virtually everyone in the IT environment and said, you need to know where your data is. You can't protect anything if you don't know where it is. Mm-hmm. The reality is today we're far beyond that, because not only do you need to know where it is, you need to know what it's there for and what it's being used to do. Because as we're developing more AI strategy, we're also in effect looking at the potential vulnerabilities of having data and not knowing what it's being used for. AI is a double-edged sword. It's a very impressive benefit to streamline operational systems and inevitably become more effective as a business, more effective as an agency, more effective as a group. But it also can become a vulnerability because we don't understand where we are positioning and using data, and how we are protecting data, how we're structuring it for the operations of a business, and ensuring that we're not abusing that information or lack of it, lack of structure, lack of benefit of how we use data. I can tell you right now, how many people today, us included, how many of us keep sensitive data on our laptop? And do we know what sensitive means? Do we understand the process and structure required to ensure that if you use AI functionally, Capilot or anything, it doesn't matter, you have sensitive data on your laptop. Are you using some of that data as a data field for your decisions that you make, depending on what you use? So these are all things you have to be aware of. I'm not saying that people are idiots. Well, maybe I am. But the point I'm making is that we put ourselves in a position to become a vulnerability. Would you not say that a human being is that one of the biggest challenges we have? Yes, because you are a walking hack. You walk and you use technology, and you're vulnerable every single minute of the day. Why? Because, well, A, we're lazy. B, we're lazy. C, we're lazy. We want things easy. We don't want things hard. And therefore, when we use things, we want it to be very simple, easy to use. We open APIs, we create, connections to systems. We develop AI strategy around the use of being easy. not hard. This is a challenge we have to face. So yes, data is the new gold. It's a new oil. It's a new platinum. But data that's unsecure, unstructured, understood, and misunderstood becomes your vulnerability. And that's really across the entire, from manufacturers all the way to practitioners.
Yep.
Stephen, when we're looking at how critical data authentication is to building AI and digital twin environments that we can consider truly trustworthy, we got to remember that your data analysis is only as good as the information you're feeding in. If you're using ZTA data from the edge to begin with, otherwise you're looking at AI and DTs that are going to be very limited, and they're going to do exactly what you said. They're going to provide us bad data in and bad data out, and the response and the execution is going to be poor. So how can we build that critical data authentication into these new emerging digital environments like AI and DT?
I think the answer is, again, you've got to think of it holistically, and you got to go back and start with the governance and work your way back to the solutions in order to shape the space. So, and Pierre said a lot on the governance side, and we talked a lot again about the threat side, but on the solutions side, right? So the rich data that enables a clear understanding of what's happening, that you can then analyze and reap sort of those groundbreaking insights that we hear the promise of AI, and I'm a believer in those. The ability to sit there and crunch boring data and to sort of synthesize that data and present it for decision makers either real time or forensically after the fact, or when you're looking at trend analysis, whatever that is. There's real promise, real potential there. There's real vulnerability as well. And Maria eloquently, again, in our pre-session, we had a great pre-session. I wish you guys could have listened in on that. That was pretty great. But there's this promise and peril, double-edged sword piece with AI that if allowed to go off unchecked, can really leave you vulnerable and sort of send your in the realm of physical security, send your response forces, for example, off in the wrong direction, right? So you've got a team safety problem there. You've got a mission effectiveness problem there. So the key is starting out at that very edge and securing that data out to that sensor, that actuator, right? Not waiting until it hits the panel, not waiting until it hits the tech stack back in the data center. You got to get it all the way out there at the edge. And again, the answer there then isn't just about a software solution or just a hardware solution. It's got to be a unified solution that gets you out there. We call it DESI, Digitally Encrypted Security Interface, out at the very edge, hardware on silicone with software that then communicates back to the field panel that authenticates that transmission continuously, so you're getting that device is transmitting, and if there's an intent to spoof it, alarms are sounded, etc. That replaces 1940s technology that is used. Some of our questioners have asked, how do I get after this? What are the cost points and those types of things? That's the type of solution that's required in order to address this problem out at the very edge. Whatever portion of your system you leave unchecked, wherever you decide to pick up security, assuming that everything beyond that is less of an issue, is where you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And again, you see it in dams. We've seen it across critical infrastructure in the energy and gas sectors, et cetera. And so it's absolutely imperative to get out to those edge devices and bring that all the way back in order for a digital twin, for example, to give you data that's of any value at all, if you can trust it.
Yeah. I want to say one thing before, because I think this will lead into Maria, really, because I'm curious. Rockwell, all the automation systems out there in the world right now, right? All mostly closed systems, not open infrastructure. They rely on their own premise of infrastructure, and they support their own infrastructure. They don't. It's like the cat and mouse, right? We want to secure it. Oh no, it's Rockwell. You got to go through Rockwell. You got to go through here. You got to go through there. This to me, just pulls in the whole thing of how do we get a universe that all wants to protect their own technology to become truly understand that we have to inevitably become open in terms of ensuring that we can develop strategy and security holistically, or am I just thinking, well, let's just stay closed and let's never get there from here? I don't know. That's Maria. That's Maria.
So I'm gonna put on two hats here. The first one is going to be my hacking hat, and I'm going to address this what we were talking in the pre-show, because I think it needs to be said. And at the Black Hat USA in August of 2025 this year, there were 3 researchers who showed how a poison calendar invite by a very popular calendar that most people use could be hijacked, and a major AI model, a very popular one that most people use these days, they hijacked it, and they were able to flip connected lights, open smart shutters, and turn on boilers and a bunch of other stuff. But AI systems don't just answer anymore, they act, okay? And actions that you never intended to happen can happen. And, imagine in critical infrastructure, the same type thing, this AI text predictor now can read the calendar, right? Invoke plugins. They can touch data lakes, right? It depends on how you've structured your network, and, fire off actions without a person watching. And each new connector tool, each new connector and tool and permissions widens what I call the blast radius, right? Because AI can work so quickly, and once it's out and unleashed, it's really hard to contain. So in critical infrastructure, now this thing we know it's already sentient. It's been told to us. And so on its own, it could shut off a flood sensor. It could turn off a process sensor or valves. It can open valves, releasing chemicals into, water and air, into the air. It can shut down motors and other equipment, maybe in a nuclear reactor, little Stuxnets on steroids. It can change a railway switch and cause a rail car collision. And then most people don't know, but I was an integrator for over 10 years. I had my own company in California. I was co-founder of an integration company. And it was interesting the way we worked, because we would take the time to design these wireless networks, and we'd have cameras and access control and other sensors on the edge. And our data was encrypted both in transit and in rest. But then we connected it to the IT network, and I'm going to say customer X. I can't say who it is, but once we went to customer X's IT department, and they said, "Okay, we just opened a port into our firewall. Go ahead and connect to it." And yeah, exactly. See what I'm saying is the hygiene isn't there. Pierre is laughing because I know this happens all the time. And what we found out is our highly secure wireless network all of a sudden became extremely insecure when we did a little bit of testing against it. And we found out that customer X had opened their Wi-Fi network, and we were able to get to a very critical aspect of this customer's functionality. And actually, this could have been an easy hack by anybody, and it could have cost lives. So this is where we're at, and we're still there. Nothing has changed. Pierre, to you.
Yeah. I mean, today I'm dealing with this right now. I mean, I'm amazed the siloed behavior is still existing at a level that it is. IT and physical security doesn't have IT at any meetings. Everybody talks about this happening. It's not. It's fundamentally not. It's still as divisive as it was 10, 15 years ago. there may be some improvements because now they understand the threat vector, right? They understand what the potential vector of threat is from physical security. So of course they put some initial processes, but the reality is that the teams aren't speaking. And frankly, when things are deployed, they aren't deployed with cyber or IT in mind. They are saying IT and cyber has that. They're going to get that. They're going to take care of that. No, it's not. As you know, it's funny because Steve spoke. We are in a converged environment. Yes, 100%. My company name is ESI Convergent with an E. The reality is that we understood this, many years ago. But the problem is that holistically, the organizations still are siloed behavior. And this is creating a distress because it's creating a false sense of security, which is leading to potential failures without even thinking what is going to take place once they install systems. They don't do a sequence of operation correctly. They're looking at integration. Well, when you talk about AI, can anybody tell me how to create a CSI format for AI right now so we can put it into a specification? Oh no, you can't. Can you please tell me a sequence of operation with the use of AI? No, you can't. Can you please explain to me how communication systems are architected? I mean, honestly, if Maria was still in business with that integration company, I would make her the biggest company in the world right now, because that's what you have to do. But then you can't be handicapped at the last mile. You can't connect. And even with MQTT port 443 as a one percenter for the standpoint of connectivity, you still have an architecture that could be vulnerable if you're not communicating across the silos. IT, OT, and SCADA, which is in and of itself a big one, big one. And we're not understanding the complexity of this. We assume a lot.
Right. And we're not even going to address the fact that in our SCADA networks, there's a lot of components from China that already have a lot.
And they're still doing it.
I'll stay out of that one, but yeah.
No, it's still happening. That's right. Because we've invested, we refuse to, in effect, take a loss. And I agree. Organizations are here to make money. They're not here to be in security. They're here to create revenue. They don't look at this as being something that they should be worried about. So the problem comes to the fact that there's a huge organization called security, right? Our industry. They're all about making money, right? Everybody's here. This is not a loss revenue. This is a profit revenue. They want to create profit. With that in mind, there is no guiding force. Everybody wants to be a guiding force, but are they really? Or is it just a lot of people trying to make money? And so we haven't come to the end of this roadmap. We assumed, we've got secured products. Good for you. We've got integrated product. Good for you. Well, now we want you to segment. Well, what do you mean? We just converged. We created connectivity to our systems. We now are out of the old legacy systems, right, of analog. We're now connected. Yeah, good for you. Now you have to segment. Well, you told us we're all going to be a happy family together. No, you now have to segment. But then you have to collaborate. You create governance and policies, bridge the gap, create zero trust inclusively as an infrastructure, not as a rudimentary hopium. I call it hopium at this point. We are still taking the drug called hopium.
Mm-hmm.
Not there yet.
I think maybe, Pierre, to that point, I think two things strike me. You hit on the revenue piece, and we've touched on it a few times. That point cannot be lost. I think our lexicon and the way with which we, and I'll say we, CISOs and others approach conversations with decision makers who are allocating budget. Nobody spends on security happily. Those expenditures are done grudgingly and, generally speaking, just sort of trying to check boxes in order to be able to satisfy insurance companies and maybe have some sort of an answer to investors or whatever when things go sideways. I think we collectively, and those who are trying to make the convincing, so we got several questions that have come in, and some of those questions are, how do we convince people to do this? We've been telling them, it's an issue. I think being conversant on the threat. There's data. The data is richer than it has probably ever been due to SEC requirements now for Fortune 500 companies, publicly traded companies, having to divulge when cyber attacks have happened and when those cyber attacks have caused issues. There's a required reporting, right? So the ability to go and to make a case that shows very clearly that OT is being exploited and that it's costing billions of dollars every year, and that we don't want to be on that list. And it becomes real easy to be articulate without being Chicken Little. The fact of the matter is, in 2024, there was a 146% increase in sites suffering physical impairment, according to one report. Now, does that mean that there was that much of an uptick in activity, or does that mean that many more organizations are having to report, or are now SEC required to report? Either way, the answer is it's prevalent. It's happening. It's not a question of if you're going to be attacked. It's not a question of if your OT is going to be targeted. It's certainly going to happen. And if that OT is in the physical security realm and somebody's able to get in or somebody's not able to get where they need to, et cetera, the consequences of that could very well be life-threatening.
Steve, Prometheus is already securing 2/3 of the U.S. nuclear assets in the country. You hold the only PL-1N certified system approach to the Air Force. So, building on what you guys are saying, what lessons from these high stakes environment can be applied to commercial and enterprise sectors? Number one, to really make the case to get ZTA and other protocols established, but also to get a better converged cooperative environment and get some of the C-level execs that you're working with get their heads out of their sand.
I think it goes back to the risk sort of axis, understanding, again, communicating how to talk on the risk axis, right? Likelihood of occurrence, consequence of occurrence gives you sort of your risk perspective. And in the environments you've just described, the likelihood of occurrence is one. The attempts are going to be there. The question is whether capable actors are interested or whether interested actors are capable, right? And when you're on that X and Y axis, it gets real scary when you think about, okay, we have vulnerabilities that nation state actors have capabilities to do things that are pretty scary. How do we build systems that can mitigate against those threats? The concerning part actually is that it doesn't really take nation state actor capability to do some of the things that are really concerning in our industrial control systems. So the way we think about how to control the very top of that critical infrastructure pyramid in the environments in which we work is taking zero trust exactly exactly as that term is applied. You're not trusting any user. You're not trusting any device. You're not trusting the data. You're looking at the data at all times, continuous authentication, those kinds of things, authentication and verification into the scene. We've got a product that looks at the video and gets beyond the camera. A lot of folks have encrypted cameras. We've developed a solution that we call scene authentication that sits in the scene and emits encrypted light back to a camera that authenticates in the scene, unlike anything else in the industry, so that you can know that what you're seeing is what's actually happening, right? So we always make the analogy to Ocean's 11 or other movies where imagery has been spoofed. And again, a lot of people do things to mitigate that at the camera. We've taken it one step further. Why? Because in those environments, the risk appetite is infinitesimal, as it should be, due to the consequences of occurrence.
Maria, we're talking about, all this verification and compliance, convergence technology and thought processes. But in actuality, I mean, you and Pierre and Stephen too with the company are still dealing with a lot of physical systems that operate in analog mode. I mean, it's just the reality of where we are today. A lot of legacy systems, and those are generating unverified data. So what's the practical path for organizations that are transitioning towards a more digitally enhanced platform? And how can they be sure that they're going to be AI ready with these systems when the time comes?
I think to open that dialogue up, you have to, well, first of all, there shouldn't be any analog out there this day and age.
Yeah, amen.
There's a lot of ways to convert analog to digital, so and then the data can be verified. But I want to address two really important things, and one of them is we got to move security, whether it be physical security, cybersecurity, out of a reactive, right? It has been, always has been, and it still is reactive. We react to an incident instead of being proactive. It needs to be moved out of in leadership. They have to understand that you need to be proactive, not reactive. You need to move the budget out of the CapEx into the OpEx, okay? Because in the long run, you are going to save money if you do things proactively, okay? Your chances of being ransomware, right, for 100 million Bitcoin, because you didn't do your due diligence up front, because you waited until you got hacked instead of making the budget. It's all about putting what is important first. And I can say what you will about New York City. I love New York City. But when they set up Cyber Command and they created a office, which I led there when I was there, that was the proactive side of cybersecurity, making sure that everything that got on the network was tested prior to its deployment. That is the way all organizations need to begin to start thinking. They cannot continue in this reactive mode. And that's exactly where we're still at. Until we change that, nothing is going to change, no matter what we do. I'm just going to leave it at that, because that is the number one thing. That is the number one thing. That mentality has to go.
Well, and I'm going to say one thing real quick. Marketing can't lead the day. We have to have practitioners who actually consult, develop, and challenge organizations to ensure that they follow the right path. I am telling you right now, we're over-marketed in our industry, people and technology, and bloviate about things that they don't know anything about, and we're leading people in the wrong direction. We need to really get stringent about how we communicate to the population, develop structured conversations that actually are beneficial, that lead to outcomes that are required. That, to me, is one of the key elements. And I'm telling you, a lot of questions about, compute, data, quantum. Listen, it's all coming right at you. But how are you managing it, and how are you structuring it?
Very good. That's a great point, Pierre. This is probably going to be our last question, and I'm going to throw this at Stephen. We're looking at national labs and critical infrastructure operators are working with you guys very closely, you guys being PSG. And they're looking for you to extend your innovation beyond just being in defensive mode. What does that expansion look like to you? And how do you see Zero Trust shaping the next decade of physical security technology? I'll let you start, and then I'll let Marie and Pierre build on that if they'd like.
Sure. So before I forget, I think partially in the answer to this question, but then just because there's no way we can delve into all the various aspects of Zero Trust for physical security in a 1-hour webinar, we developed a guide that sort of gives a little bit of a sense for how we're thinking about this in the realm of physical security, how PSG is thinking about it. So we developed a guide that's on the website. It's a guide for architects, engineers, integrators, OEMs, et cetera. It's on our website, psgglobal.net. We'll have links to it in LinkedIn, et cetera. good place to go and sort of pick up the narrative and the reading from there, both from a solutions perspective, and then how we think about the problem going forward. And how we think about solutions going forward. We spent a lot of time on defining the problem today and defining the threat and talking about the risk. And I think that's all critical, again, back to justifying the expenditures. But I think part of what's missing in that narrative and what we'd like to see going forward, to answer your question there, Steve, is taking physical security away from being considered a cost center and to thinking about it as a revenue driver. And we've touched on that a few times in comments, but I guess as we sum up here, the data that is coming from the devices out on the edge of these systems is rich data. As we define it, as we understand it, as we get access to it, the ability to gain insights from that data generated by those edge devices in operational technology systems and leverage that to realize cost savings and things that actually impact the bottom line is something that, A, I think we need to be more conversant about, and B, really kind of explore in more depth. And we see that for organizations across critical infrastructure and just industry in general, being able to tap into the security system and being able to trust the data they're seeing because it's adequately secured, whether you're talking about tying into AI platforms or otherwise, that you can trust what you see because it's being continuously authenticated and verified. Further down the road, someone's asked a question about what's the impact of quantum in this realm, and you talk about a game changer, a complete game changer, right? So actively today, actors are pulling encrypted data in and gathering it, and they can't do anything with it, but they're gathering it so that when quantum computing is available at scale, they can go ahead and hack into it and understand whatever it was that we had encrypted and protected behind encryption today, that stuff being hacked. Those are the types of things we got to think about going forward, and those are that's exactly the type of approach and thinking that's happening at PSG as we try to anticipate and stay ahead of the threat. So again, compliance is important, particularly federal government agencies and that kind of thing. They're all trying to make sure that they stay in line with the directives coming out of the Oval Office and so forth. But the spirit of that is almost as important or as equally as important as the explicit requirements that are coming out of that. And part of that is anticipating what's coming down the pipeline, threats like quantum and so forth. And so a lot of innovation happening, exciting place to be around anticipating those threats that are coming, Steve, and not innovating for the sake of innovation, but innovating for the sake of securing the grid, securing critical infrastructure. Highly motivating mission that we helps us get up every day and charge on.
I can't think of a better place to end the conversation today. Unfortunately, with Maria and Pierre, we could go on for another 2 hours, and we may do that because there's a lot to cover here, and we just sort of scratched the surface. With that being said, I want to thank everybody who attended. We had a great crowd today. We really did, and we had a lot of pre-registrants, so I'm looking forward to seeing those folks get it on the recorded version. But most of all, I want to thank Maria and Pierre for joining us. Pierre, short notice, you filled in admirably, as you always do. And Stephen for just explaining what we're looking at when we talk about zero trust and its applications, and really explaining why Prometheus is a company that needs to be understood and appreciated, because what you're doing not only is furthering what zero trust is all about, but it's making people understand that we need to take data and critical data protection seriously. So again, thanks Prometheus for being our sponsor on this. And as a reminder, following today's presentation, the webinar is going to be archived on our site for 6 months, and you'll receive an email notification once that's occurred. You can access more webinars by going to securityinfowatch.com/webinars. Again, my thanks to Maria, Pierre, and Stephen, and Prometheus for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.